Oh, there we go.
Okay, it popped up on my screen now.
Perfect.
So. Great. All right, and we have more people joining. We're going to start in about 5 minutes. Thank you to everyone who joined so far. And I feel like there's a little music being picked up in the background. So if your phone isn't muted, can you please mute it? Great. Thank you. Hi, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Welcome to our Conversation Project Community Call. I hope you all are having a great week. My name is Naomi Fedna, and I'm the project coordinator for the Conversation Project, and today I'll be your WebEx host. And also today, the WebEx platform has been having a little bit of technical issues that have caused some calls to randomly shut down or crash. But I'm really optimistic. I don't think that's going to happen on our call today, but in the event that this happens, we will be sure to record this presentation and send it to all registrants. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, I'd like to run through a few WebEx tips and tricks. If you have a question or a comment that at any point during the call, feel free to type it into the chat box at the bottom of your screen and send it to all participants. You can also use the raise your hand icon, which is located on the right-hand side, and we'll be sure to call on you so you can voice your question or your comment. And if you're having any technical difficulties, please use that same drop-down menu and click Chat to Host, and I'll be able to help you out. So we're going to take a moment to get things started in the chat. So in just a few seconds, I want you to type into the chat box, how did you hear about this call? Did you hear about it through a newsletter? Did you hear about it through Twitter, Facebook, word of mouth? We want to learn where people are hearing about our community calls. And remember to chat to all participants. All right, Patty heard about this call through email. An email from Honoring Choices. Oh, awesome. People are sharing it through their different networks. Some people have heard it through a newsletter, coworker sent the information. Great. All right, so continue to put in your answers in the chat box, but before we dive right in, we want to know where people are joining us from. So to get a sense where we're all located, please point to where you're calling from on the map. To do this, use the arrow key in the upper left-hand corner of your screen, right above the WebEx presentation you're currently viewing, and click the arrow key, and then click on the map where you're located. I am located in Boston. We have folks from California, Texas, Georgia, Washington State, Patty's in Virginia. Great. And we have some people who are calling in from Colorado and Ohio. Great. It seems like we have a great team with us today. All right. And so with that, I'm going to pass the ball off to Patty, who's going to be leading the rest of our call.
Great. Thank you, Naomi. Naomi, can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you well.
All right. So thanks for kicking us off, and I'm excited to see the number of people on. I anticipate we'll get some more folks because we had a large number signing up, so I'm excited to have the opportunity to chat with you guys today. We'll start off with a nice small group and grow, I'm sure. What I wanted to do is we have a real full agenda, and we have about an hour to share a little bit about background on what we're doing at the Conversation Project, some of our work, introduce you to the Conversation Starter Kit if you haven't yet seen it, the one specifically for loved ones with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, and talk a little bit about what we've learned about integrating dementia and Alzheimer's specific focus into some of our Starter Kit workshops and what we're hearing from folks who have been doing this across the country. So as you know, with the Conversation Project, we learn a lot about what's happening from you on the ground. And then we're going to really dive into the meat of this call, and I'm really excited to have the opportunity to introduce Hillary Walker, and I'll introduce her a little bit more detailed later, but Hillary is joining us from Bellingham, Washington, and she's going to share what her and her team are doing out in PeaceHealth and integrating dementia work within their advanced care programming work, and just really excited to have Hillary share a little bit about what they're doing, what they're learning, to hopefully help those that are on the call. And then we're going to dive into some Q&A, so opportunity to ask Hillary some questions, see what's resonating, see what comments that you all have from that. So as she's presenting later, definitely feel free to use that chat function and pop in any thoughts and comments as we go along. We're really informal on these calls, so as you have things that pop in your head, go ahead and pop it through in chat. I also want you guys to feel that you can talk to each other. So if you're seeing someone in the same neck of your woods or someone makes a comment you want to reply to them, please definitely do so as we go along. So we'll also stop and make sure we see what's going on in chat as well. I see Jean is not hearing anything, so we're also, Naomi's here to help troubleshoot for any troubles that we have, so feel free to chat in any difficulties you may be having. So another big thing that we hope to do today is have a real great discussion to hear what you all are doing. So I know we have a lot of folks on the call, and I'm excited to see some familiar faces. I see Ashley Arian, Ronnie Genser, Patty Pauline. I see a lot of great folks that I know are doing wonderful work across the country. So we're going to open it up and have some opportunity to share some strategies and hear what you guys are doing to engage individuals, families, and communities that are touched by Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia. So I want to keep this real open. And then at the end, I'm just going to quickly pop in and share a little bit of some resources that you may or may not know about, talk about some upcoming calls that we have, and some events that you might be interested in. Okay, so with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to this chat button again. So I'm just looking at the names that are on the call, and I'd love for you to type in, so those that are on the computer that are able to type into chat, if you could just let us know what type of advanced care planning or conversation project related work you're doing right now. So if you're using some of our materials or other materials, just share a little bit about what you're doing now. And as a second part of that, what I'd really like to know is what experience you have with integrating dementia and Alzheimer's specific programming into the work that you're doing. So if you are brand new and you haven't done anything and you're here to learn from others, you might be considered a newbie. If you've been doing work that is reaching loved ones and families that have been touched by Alzheimer's disease, maybe you're more seasoned, pop that in. If you're somewhere in between, go ahead and note that. That's just going to help me and help Hillary as we try to tailor some of our learning to who's on the call. So I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of time to pop some of that in. I'm seeing seasoned and newbie, so far this is good. We've got a spectrum, and as you do that, what I'm going to do is, great, David, I hear you're here to learn. That's wonderful. As you continue, keep continuing to chat in a little bit about what you're doing to just frame it up for everybody who's on the call. I'm going to run through a little bit about the Conversation Project. For those that might be brand new to the Conversation Project, I just want to give a quick background before we get into some of the learning that we have. We are a national public engagement campaign, and we're dedicated to this really big, audacious goal to assuring that everyone's wishes for end-of-life care are both expressed and respected. Most of our community work is on that express side, so we want to make sure that our wishes are being expressed and talked about before a healthcare episode happens, but it's equally important that those wishes are respected on the healthcare side when necessary and needed. And so the way that we do that is we raise awareness by providing a couple different ways. Free and easy to use guidelines and guidance that's available on our website, and I'll share some of the tools that we have. And we're reaching out to people where they live, work, and pray. And so these calls are really dedicated to those who are really engaging their communities. So it may be in a small setting. You may be engaging someone in a book club, or you may be doing this for 5 years or more and engaging your whole community. These calls are really to help support and give ideas and guidance. And so we have a whole host of other calls that we do. And so I won't go into all the different work that we're doing at the Conversation Project, but if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to sit in on some of our other calls that we have. We've got training calls, we have community guidance, and so forth, and we'll go over that towards the end of the call as well. So the way that we're working towards that really transformational culture change is through what we kind of call our double helix model. And so we know how important it is to influence care from both two directions. So on this left-hand side, we're doing this through public awareness and community engagement. And in addition to that community side, we also know how important it is to focus on work in healthcare systems. So we have part of our project, Conversation Ready, is we're helping health systems and healthcare organizations become ready to respect those wishes. So we're doing this work from both sides. And what really is important and what we're trying to shift from is conversations that usually are clinical, that are focused on what's the matter with me, and which is extremely important, but we also want to back that up, and the work that we're focusing on, the tools that we have, really are focusing here on what matters to me. So the Conversation Project is really all about values-based conversations. So what are your beliefs? What makes life worth living? And understanding that early on, so when the time comes, decisions that have to be made in a clinical setting, so there's important decisions later on, those decisions can be grounded in the what matters to me conversations. And so that's really important today as we reflect on that and understand that the conversations that we have now, and as we are sharing those with people who need to make those critical decisions with us or possibly for us, especially during this topic of dementia and Alzheimer's, I want to make sure that we're kind of grounding. We want to make sure that we have those conversations, and those folks that are going to make those decisions know exactly what we want. So our tools, just really quick, we have a lot of different starter kits. We're going to be focusing on one today. Our flagship starter kit is a conversation starter kit, and it really is that values-based conversation and prompts folks to walk through some of those key questions on how to think about what really matters to them. We have a healthcare proxy kit, so how to choose and be a healthcare proxy, how to talk to your doctor. So once you're having these conversations with families, how do you approach your doctor and thoughtfully bring these up with your doctor rather than waiting for your doctor to do that with you. And then finally, we have a pediatric starter kit for parents who are really wanting to engage and have these really important, intimate conversations with their children who may be seriously ill. And so we have these kits in multiple languages. We also have an audio version. We have some recent Chinese translations that are new that have just come out, so lots of different formats for families. And so we're going to dive in today to really focus in on our kit that is for families and loved ones of people with Alzheimer's disease. Before we do that, I'm going to take a pause and just pop over here to the chat function and see where folks are coming from. Great. So Ashley is saying they're willing partners for Alzheimer's focus, but have yet to have anyone attend a session. So this is great. So I asked folks before, what are they doing? Where are they in the process? So just kind of reviewing some of those comments in the chat function. Jamie is here with End of Life Explorer, or Jamie's hosting End of Life Explorer sessions in California. Great, Jamie, you're a newbie for this topic, so this will be great to hear kind of what questions you may have that you can ask Hillary and some other seasoned folks that are on the call. This is great. So we have Kendra, who did a First Steps Respecting Choices class. That's wonderful. I'm excited to hear in conjunction with Dementia Friendly Fort Worth. Oh, this is fabulous. You're going to be adding the Conversation Project materials in your follow-up session. Great. Kendra, I'm going to be really interested to see how that went. I'd love to hear more of how that resonated with folks in the class. And so feel free to pop in any of those comments. Ronnie Gensler, I know you're real seasoned in this. She does a lot of speaking engagements on advanced care planning and Conversation Project. She's been incorporating dementia, Alzheimer's specific information in speeches. So Ronnie, great. We'll pull you in towards the discussion. I'd love to hear more about what's worked, what hasn't, what should some of these newbies be thinking about. So great. This is wonderful. And I see that we've got a lot of folks here that I've seen on some of our other calls, so I'm just really excited to hear a little bit about what is top of mind for you as we go through this. Okay, so I'm going to just dive in here. So all of us in the advanced care planning world know that it's really not easy for anyone to begin this conversation about how they want to live at the end of their lives and about the care that they may want or the care that they may not want. So at the Conversation Project, we highlight how important it is to have this conversation throughout that life cycle. So starting from age 18 on, so when you're well, when you're needing to make decisions as an adult right at the beginning, when illness may come on, that's another time, and obviously in aging it happens. But we want to make sure that this happens throughout the spectrum. But we know that it's both really more difficult and more important to emphasize the importance of having this talk as soon as possible with those that are affected by Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia. And so the reason for this, and you know, those that work in this field, is simple. As the disease progresses and mom or dad's ability to think and share their thoughts declines, it's going to become even more difficult for them to express his or her wishes. So we know, though, that knowing these wishes will be a critical guide to help caregivers through the many decisions that have to be made. So at the Conversation Project, we know how important this was. We developed this conversation starter kit designed to help those loved ones. And the kit has as its core some of the same guiding questions that we use in our flagship conversation starter kit, but it's really framed differently. So rather than framing it based on what the individual thinks and feels and the participant who's going through that feels, it's really, the instructions keep the framing in terms of the family member who's helping their loved one who may be affected by this, really keeping their loved ones at the center. So there's a shift in the mindset, so an invitation to imagine that you are answering the questions as though you were the person with dementia, bringing your family member's voice into that conversation, and that's really important. As we've been using this kit and testing it out, we've heard people using it in different varieties of settings. We have done a lot of learning, and we've learned kind of what's resonating with folks. And hopefully this will help those who are thinking about doing some of this programming. We're going to pull some of what we learned, and then we're going to jump into Hillary's presentation and hear a little bit about what they're learning. So as we first tested the kits in various settings, we wondered whether this starter kit could be used to teach individuals in a small group setting about these value-based conversations and their loved ones. So those of you who are familiar with some of our starter kit workshops, and many of you have taken this and have adapted and run with it and doing some really wonderful workshops in your own communities. What we do, if you're not familiar, we teach others to kind of walk through this kit, and it's a real interactive workshop. And it helps people reflect on their own values. And what we found is that using this kit with families across all the spectrum in the progression of the disease, it works really well in a starter kit session. And so we're excited to share a little bit about some of that learning. So our concern at the beginning was that we wondered about running these workshops with caregivers, and we wondered whether or not the experience of caregivers might be akin to experiencing grief. So in other words, would caregivers whose loved ones have early stage disease feel too different from those caring for people in the late stage of illness? So having different people in this different spectrum where their loved ones are, would that be difficult in a group setting? But it turns out that we are not seeing this at all, and I'll be curious to hear what others have learned. But rather, we've noticed a sense of camaraderie that emerges very quickly of people who are sharing a context of experience, even though each individual situation is uniquely experienced. And so I also want to, I just want to pause here. And so I'm sharing learning, and I just wanted to give a shout out. So this is a lot of learning that's based on my esteemed colleague, Rosemary Lloyd, who is the Faith Conversation lead to the Conversation Project. She has tested this out and worked with a bunch of groups, some that are on the call, and she has compiled a lot of this great learning. We weren't able to have Rosemary with us on the call, so I am just relaying a lot of the learning that she's done. And so we've done a lot of different testing and evaluating from the participants that are in these sessions. And so another real big thing that we've learned is it doesn't matter where on the spectrum someone is, in whether it's early, middle, or late in the diagnosis, it still can be really helpful to use this kit or other resources to reflect at all stages what they may want. So upon early diagnosis, so when someone is first diagnosed, that person may wish to use and be encouraged to use the starter kit to identify values and help facilitate conversations with their chosen decision makers and other family members who are likely to wish to participate in decisions later on about medical care. So at this stage, it's really helpful to really talk through that, appoint a proxy, document those wishes, and family and loved ones are really seeking to get more information about what to expect in some of those later stages. In the middle stages of the disease, we are finding, and we've learned, that there's still moments when it's possible to remind the person with memory loss about a prior situation of death or dying just through simple prompts. So remember when mom died, or remember when dad was on a ventilator, and start to reminisce on how that felt. And so people have been able to articulate some of those feelings even at this stage. And then as we have families that are at that later stage of disease, when loved ones are no longer able to express their wishes, families may find it helpful to use the starter kit as a guide to come together to really reach consensus about the values expressed in the past by their loved one who has memory loss. So it may be helpful to reflect on how Dad has lived his life. So remembering a family event and the values and opinions that Dad expressed in that situation can really help anchor folks, which leads us to a simple, and it may be kind of an obvious, but I think worth emphasizing lesson that we've learned is really that reminding caregivers to keep that person in the middle is a simple but often forgotten concept, as it's really natural when you're running workshops for people to start talking about what they would want rather than what mom or dad would want. So we suggest offering up some gentle reminders to encourage folks to keep their loved ones at the center, to really to bring them into the room. So if they're not there, bring them into the room and think about what their voice would say. And we've heard, and when we've tested out some of these workshops, in all of the evaluations, every participant has said that they found the process of going through these questions with reminders to keep their loved one at the center really helpful. We've heard some real sincere appreciation about the tip on how to use this kit to get other family members on the same page, and I know that's a challenge in any situation, and especially in this situation. So it can be kind of a rallying force to help work with family members. We're also hearing that people get surprised when walking through, because there's some language in the kit that talks about the terminal phase of Alzheimer's, and we're hearing that people are surprised to hear that Alzheimer's is a terminal illness. So just something to keep in mind. It may not be a surprise to those that are already working in this field that family members don't always hear, or they might not grasp that Alzheimer's disease is a terminal illness. And I know Hillary's going to talk a little bit about this. I think they've experienced some of this as well. When you're having a discussion or hosting a workshop, just be aware that this may be new information to some of those that are in the workshop. So some may need to kind of take this in a little bit quietly and give some space for that. Know that these workshops, people have said that it has been very useful to kind of reflect on that, and then gently guide them through some of the decisions that they may need to anticipate as the disease progresses. So treating pneumonia, artificial feeding, and so forth. So they are not making some of those decisions in a crisis situation. This is a definition that in a really great resource that you might want to check out if you aren't familiar with it, that just kind of helps explain a little bit about the diagnosis. And then just quickly, some of the other things that we've learned, and I'm going to pause after this and just kind of get over to our chat and see what folks have to say before we jump into Hillary. Other things that we've learned is that when we've set up the conversation, it's really helpful to acknowledge as caretakers in the room. So acknowledge how hard it is for them. So really ensure that we're focusing on kindness, compassion, and courage as we kind of the hallmarks to setting up these type of conversations and workshops with folks. We found it really helpful in a workshop or a small group setting to acknowledge the barriers or why people put off having the conversation with their loved one with dementia. And so recognizing and having a conversation around this is really important, and it's been helpful for folks. Talking about how people often hesitate because it may seem unkind to suggest to people we love that they're losing their mental ability. So just really kind of unpacking some of the feelings that people in the room might be feeling. And then really emphasizing that the conversation allows their loved ones to know that they will be there for them. So we emphasize that having the conversation about care, and especially care at the end of life, isn't intrusive or unkind. On the contrary, it may be the most intimate way to promise to your loved one that you will be there for them. You will be their voice, and you will respect them and their wishes. They will not disappear. And we've heard that brings a lot of comfort to folks. What we're seeing is caretakers in general find this process of considering what their loved one might want very helpful. So know that this is something that people want, even though it might be intimidating to figure out how do we do this, and we're going to hear some more from Hillary about that. So these are just some of the key lessons that we have learned, and we know that there's some incredible work happening across the field, not just using our kits, but a variety of wonderful resources that Hillary's going to share a little bit more about. And so I'm going to just pause before we jump over to Hillary and see what's going on in chat.
Patty?
Yes, go ahead.
So before we pop into the chat, there is one person who had raised their hand, and I wanted to just unmute them and maybe allow them to ask a question.
Perfect. Sounds great, Naomi.
Lindsay Singh, did you have a question or comment? I unmuted you.
Lindsay, can you hear us? We see your hand up. We're wondering if you want to jump in.
Oh, I don't realize I raised my hand.
Okay.
Don't worry. That happens often, so that's okay. We just want to make sure that we got you, though. Thanks, Naomi. I appreciate that. Naomi, anything else that's coming through chat as you've been taking a look at it before we jump into Hillary that we want to address?
Nothing that pops up. Nope.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I see that people are sharing a lot of what they're doing, and so keep at that. I think that's really helpful. So hopefully that's set Hillary up a little bit about what she's going to share. And so without further ado, I'm going to introduce Hillary and pop over to her slides. Hold on one second. Let me pass you the ball, Hillary. Okay, so we have, and I'm really excited to introduce Hillary Walker. She is the program coordinator for advanced care planning at PeaceHealth, which is located out in Washington State. She is the trained facilitator instructor for advanced care planning through Honoring Choices Pacific Northwest. I'm really excited to have that background and experience with us. Hillary's background, her clinical background, is as a geriatric occupational therapist in acute care, intensive care, home health, and skilled nursing facilities. So she has been within this world for 15 years and has really seen firsthand the importance of advanced care planning conversations and documents to support patient-centered and quality of care. So Hillary, I'm really excited to have you here. So go ahead and share a little bit about what's been going on in your world.
Okay. Thank you so much for having me on this call. I'm very excited to share some of the work that we've been doing up here in Bellingham. And as you mentioned, I started my work in healthcare as a geriatric occupational therapist and definitely saw firsthand the lack of advanced care planning in a lot of the situations I was witness to, and started asking around whose job is it to have these conversations with patients around goals of care conversations and making sure that we're staying in alignment with their wishes, with the treatment options we're suggesting. And as probably many of you can relate, there was a lot of fingers going back and forth with who was having these conversations, and basically it came to that there weren't very many people comfortable having these types of conversations with patients. And so we're all doing really good work out there and making sure that we're empowering not only patients but their families around advanced care planning. And this population of dementia and Alzheimer's is especially dear to my heart just in my work as an OT. And really seeing folks in later stages of this disease process and looking into their eyes and talking about care plans and functional outcomes and this and that as a therapist, and wishing that I had been able to talk to their earlier selves and gotten a glimpse in whether the life they were living that was in front of me and in front of their families was really in alignment with what their wishes would have been had they given an opportunity to speak earlier. So I just want to say I do work with PeaceHealth, and we actually span across Washington, Alaska, and Oregon, although I am based in Bellingham, Washington. And this position at PeaceHealth is new as the program coordinator for advanced care planning. So we're making it up as we're going along, learning a lot. A huge part of my job is education. And as you can imagine, if you're out there doing this work, it's hard to do it all. So as I mentioned, this work was very dear to my heart. I teach classes on just general advanced care planning in the community and with one-on-one patients in different clinics. But I wanted to really specifically create a class for people with dementia. So the two women in the community who are teaching this class what I'm going to be presenting to you today is a class that they have created with the guidance from myself and another fellow nurse practitioner who works in palliative care and hospice and is also on the state Pulse Task Force. Her name is Charmin Figgenshaw. So we met several times to create this class, or to help them create this class. And the two women who have taken this on are independent community members. They don't work for PeaceHealth, but we meet with them often to make sure that we're all giving consistent information to our communities. So the two women who were unfortunately unable to be on the call today, so I'm offering to present some of the wonderful work that they've been taking into the community. Their names are Adrienne Doucette and Denise Weeks. Adrienne Doucette is a hospice volunteer. She's a caregiver for folks with dementia, and she's been teaching general advanced care planning in the classes in the community for several years. Denise Weeks is a trained advanced care planning facilitator with Respecting Choices. She is an author of a book called Mantra, which is a conversation about caring for her mother who has Alzheimer's. So she's also a caregiver and helps run some of the caregiver support groups. So I just want to acknowledge them, and at the end of my presentation will be an opportunity, some contact information to reach out to them if you want more information. So the name of the class that we came up with is ACP plus D, and I love that name. So it's just Advanced Care Planning with a Diagnosis of Dementia. So there's several slides in the presentation. I'm just going to share a few with you to give you a general idea of these classes, what they're teaching in the classes, what folks are able to learn a bit about. They recently offered this presentation at the local Alzheimer's Society conference. There were over 200 people there, and it was really well received. Much needed information. So you'll see as I'm going through the slides that a lot of the information I'll present is Washington State specific. So I'll just say that as you're looking at creating these resources in your own community, it will be helpful to see what state-specific documents you have related to Alzheimer's and dementia. There's a few of them that I'll mention that are available for you to use in whatever state you live in. But just want to give you a general idea of what these wonderful women are taking out into the community. So the first piece is just the importance of advanced care planning, which a lot of us already know, but it's just giving a general overview, making my wishes for treatment known. It empowers the family members to provide a roadmap for care, reduces conflict among loved ones, eliminates painful doubts and questions that can be answered, can never be answered after a loved one dies. And I would add on there that advanced care planning allows folks, as you're all aware, to choose who will speak for them on their behalf if and when they lose their ability to make their own decisions. So that's a really key piece in the conversation with folks with a diagnosis of dementia. So again, I'm just showing you a few of the slides. So there's a few slides in between that they present, but I like this one, bringing up some tools. So planning ahead for dementia. So breaking it into planning for living with dementia, we have a lot of really valuable resources here in Washington State. One is the roadmap that if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend you check it out. It was created by the Washington State Dementia Action Collaborative and gives some really fabulous information to help guide families through some specific issues and challenges, beautiful moments that may come up with a diagnosis of dementia. Another document we have here in Washington State, which I also would recommend that you check out just as a conversation tool, is the End of Life Washington's Dementia Directive. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later in one of the other slides. And then the Conversation Starter Kit, which you talked about, Patty, and I have a few things I'd love to say about that a little bit later. So breaking it down into planning for living with dementia and then planning for dying with dementia, We have a document that was just created in the last several years by Dr. Gaster at UW, University of Washington. It's a health directive for dementia. I'll go into that a little bit more in another slide. This document is not a legally binding document, so when we get to that document, that is something that you could use no matter what state you live in. I find it incredibly helpful from the therapy perspective and acute care perspective, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. Another document we have here in Washington State that you may have heard about is Instructions for Oral Feeding and Drinking, which was created by End of Life Washington, which gives folks an opportunity to say in advance if they start to enter into a stage in their life where they are showing little interest in eating or no interest in eating, they can comment on whether they wish to be fed by somebody else. So I would encourage you to take a look at all of those documents just for your own information. So this is a really beautiful list that Denise and Adrian came up with. How does dementia change the advanced care planning process? So a lot of these things will sound familiar to you, and it's just pieces that they want to elevate into the room with folks that are coming for the workshop. So folks with Alzheimer's and dementia may not be aware of their condition, so that might be different than we're working with somebody who has a recent diagnosis of cancer or a recent diagnosis of end stage, whatever it might be, that quite often those people who come in for advanced care planning are very aware of what is going on with them. But folks with dementia may not be aware. They might not understand the disease or how it progresses. So that goes back to what Patty was saying, is that quite often a lot of the education is around the fact that dementia and Alzheimer's and different other types of dementia is a terminal diagnosis. These folks may forget what you discussed or change their mind often, surprise you with new ideas or values, which sometimes can make the advanced care planning challenging, definitely dynamic. They may tell different people different things, become distrustful, refuse to talk about their health, let alone dying, refuse to sign anything. This is something we've been hearing from a lot of family members, especially if the conversation is put off for too long, that these patients are sometimes, or these people are sometimes refusing to sign the documents. On the other hand, they may agree with anything that anyone else tells them. So really important that they have a real consistent person with them when they're going to these meetings about advanced care planning and what their treatment options might be. Some other ways that dementia can change the advanced care planning process: someone will likely have to be a part of support decision-making process much earlier and much more actively. Excuse me. So this is something that we spend, I spend quite a bit of time talking with folks on when I meet with folks one-on-one, and Denise and Adrian spend quite a bit of time on in their classes, is when we're talking with folks about choosing a healthcare agent. For other diagnoses, it may be if you need somebody down the road. So I hear a lot, as you may, best case scenario, I'm not ever going to need these documents. I'll just enter into my disease process. I'll be cognitively aware of what's going on the whole time, and I'll die a peaceful death at home. When we explain that the documents would, any advanced care planning documents would only come into play when the person's unable to communicate. So an important piece is really communicating that who you choose as your healthcare agent and who agrees to be the healthcare agent will very likely have to be much involved in the process much earlier, much more actively, and quite often for a longer period of time. So I find that that's really helpful for people to hear and understand when they're choosing a healthcare agent, as well as people agreeing to be the healthcare agent. So one example of this is, I've heard people teach this in different ways, but if you're talking with somebody who doesn't have dementia and they're choosing a healthcare agent and they say, does my primary agent need to live locally? We may say not necessarily, that's the #1 person you want involved. in your care, and they could live locally, but they don't need to. In this situation, when they're teaching in the class and when I'm working with folks, I do strongly encourage the primary agent to be somebody who lives locally, because there's going to be a lot of things that come up which address that much more actively, much more needing to be engaged much more often. So some possible things that come up are dealing with pharmacy and overseeing medications, observe and getting treatment for things that the person with dementia has a hard time identifying or denies. Excuse me. Overseeing doctor's visits in hospitals, they're very important, making sure that they're understanding what the doctors are saying, make decisions about what to treat and how. Denise gives a really beautiful example of this with her mom, that the way that the doctor had presented a certain surgical procedure to her sounded great to her, even though she had expressed not wanting to really go forward with advanced medical treatment. But the way it was presented by the doctor, it sounded, we'll just do this real basic procedure and then you'll be up and going again and it will be great. And she said yes. So Denise was there, who was her daughter and healthcare agent, and she was able to turn to her mom and say, so what the doctor's saying is they're going to cut you open and you would have to stay in the hospital, you would need a lot of medication, and she was able to explain it in a way that her mom rethought about whether she would want to go through with that procedure or not. So steer the person to getting a diagnosis in the first place is incredibly helpful. And many non-medical issues that come up. So one piece that is mentioned in this class, and often when I'm talking with folks, is with other diagnoses, it may not be as important that the healthcare agent is also the financial durable power of attorney, but quite often when it's a long-standing disease process that we're looking at, and for potentially that a long extended amount of time that that person may not be able to make their own decisions, excuse me, it's helpful in some situations for the durable power of attorney for healthcare and durable power of attorney for finances to be the same person if they start taking over that person's finances and can pay for medication and often making decisions around things. So I'd be very curious to hear other people's thoughts on that. So this is one of the tools for exploring issues that I brought up earlier, and it's the Alzheimer's Disease Dementia Mental Health Advanced Directive. This is a document that's helpful for living with dementia. If you haven't seen it already, again, I strongly encourage you to look at it. It's quite extensive. It's about 16 pages long, and people with dementia may not necessarily, or anyone for that matter, may not necessarily be able to complete this extensive document, but it brings up a lot of important excuse me, brings up a lot of important things that may come up that would be helpful to talk about ahead of time. So Denise and Adrian just give some examples here. How does the person feel about having outside caregivers? If placement is needed, where would that person want to go? How do they feel about that? Financing future care, future intimate relationships, care of their pets, participation in research. At what point would they willingly give up their driver's license, etc. So it's just a lot of really powerful conversation pieces that may come up along the disease process. So the other tool we talked about that Patty talked about earlier is the conversation tool from the Conversation Project. This is a fabulous document. I strongly recommend spending some time with it. And I just want to point out a few things that I really appreciate in this document that I also talk about when I'm meeting with folks one-on-one in the early stages of this diagnosis. And that is to make it clear that the conversation goes both ways. So I found it really helpful for caregivers or family members to share their own wishes as well at the same time. So I appreciate that you've elevated that in the document here. Sharing your own wishes, sharing your own document, not having it be all about the person with a diagnosis, with a terminal diagnosis, etc. Another piece that's brought up in the conversation project tool is doing the advanced care planning process as soon as possible. It's a big thing, part of the education that we are doing with a lot of the providers here is that as soon as anyone is given a diagnosis of dementia, we want to get them in for an advanced care planning conversation as soon as possible, or have them go to one of the classes, gain more information about what's important for them to know. And another thing that's highlighted in the conversation tool, which I think is really important, is that people with this diagnosis, and it ranges, of course, but may not be able to grasp, would you want a feeding tube? Would you want a breathing machine? Would you want CPR? Would you want the medical diagnosis piece of it? But really, one of the most important conversations is to have who will make decisions for you, would you want to make decisions for you if and when you're no longer able to make decisions for yourself, and really making sure that they're clear about what that decision means and that they're able to have conversations with that person in advance. Okay. Dr. Gaster's tool, again, this is another dementia directive more towards end-of-life process, breaks things down into different stages, so mild, moderate, and severe dementia. In these different stages, what type of advanced medical treatment would you want? So it's very much about medical treatment. I could talk about this all day, and I see I'm getting short on time, so I just want to briefly show you Dr. Gaster's directive. He talks, these are the options for each stage. So in the mild stage, would you want to live as long as you could, some in-between options, or comfort measures only? And then into the middle stages of Alzheimer's or dementia and the end stages, because quite often people have different opinions about what kind of medical care they would want depending on what their quality of life looks like and what their symptoms might look like. And lastly, they just touch on what if you don't want to live with dementia. And they do, Denise and Adrian talk with folks about modifying diet and behavior, the importance of early diagnosis, touch briefly on voluntarily stop eating and drinking, which is a hot topic in our state these days. Phrase it in the way of possible off-ramps. I think this is really important to discuss with family members so that they know what their options are down the road to possibly not treat infections that come up if they believe that's in alignment with what their loved one's values would be, such as UTIs or pneumonia, whether you would treat a complication from a fall or not, etc. So these are just some resources for the documents that we talked about, and additional contact information for getting in touch with Adrian and Denise, the women who've created this slideshow and presentation for our community up here.
Great. Hillary, thank you so much. This has been a wealth of information, and I know we could spend an hour just kind of diving into a lot of the details because you guys have done a lot of really wonderful programming. So thank you. I just want to thank you for sharing a bit about what you guys are doing. And I want to just point, so we've got some questions coming in, and I just want to ask if anybody has questions, feel free to pop it in the chat. You can also raise your hand, and we take folks off of mute. I'd love to have people join in on conversation. Jamie is asking, how long are your sessions?
So when I meet with just one person one-on-one, I usually schedule an hour. They don't always take that long, but specifically with the diagnosis of dementia. And if I'm meeting with a couple, I schedule an hour and a half. So I know that folks don't always have that much time, but that's what I'm able to do up here.
Great. And then how long is the ACP&D session? I think it was on the beginning, at the beginning, but just reinforce how long is the course itself?
They allow 2 hours for the class. The presentation is about an hour and 15 minutes, sometimes an hour and a half, and leave a lot of time at the end for questions.
This is great. So as we wait to see if anyone else has questions, some of the things that, as you shared, was really resonating. What I love is that you're doing is that your colleague who is a caregiver. So you have someone with lived experience who's designing and running this, and I think that's phenomenal. So I think that's such an important, powerful lesson for those that are thinking about running this, is that you have someone who can share that really personal story. And obviously, death is something that happens to all of us. So as we do our workshops, we recognize we all have stories about this. But I love how you've been really integrative on who's designing this course and really being thoughtful about that. I also love your framing about living with and dying with Alzheimer's. So you've kind of framed this accordingly, and that may have come out from the work that you've done, or I'm not sure how you came up with that, but I love the way that you're framing it. And I importantly love you discuss some of the challenges that people have, so refusing to sign documents, changing their mind. That's really important for people to know, so I appreciate that. I want to just pop over. Ashley has a question, and this is a great one. And Ashley had mentioned before a little bit about recruitment. So her question is, can you share the name of the program or how you're marketing it? And I'm gonna piggyback onto Ashley's question. How do you recruit? Because she had noted before that she was really willing to host and do sessions, but how do you pull people in? How are you getting those folks that you want to attend these sessions?
So the group sessions that Adrian and Denise are doing in the community, they are working directly, one piece that they're doing is working with the local Alzheimer's Society. So a lot of their caregiver support groups and different people that they're working with already through the Alzheimer's Society, they're talking with those folks. They're also talking with folks who are residents and family members in the local dementia care units and specific facilities for dementia, and reaching out to those and the caregivers, meaning the people who work in those facilities as well, and encouraging them to come to the classes and learn as much as they can so that they can be advocates for the folks that they work with. I also let all of the providers and folks in the clinics where I work, I hang up their flyers in our local hospital. They have them up all over the local libraries and co-ops and different areas in town. I think really key working with, if you have a local Alzheimer's Society or group that's already engaged with this population, and also letting any providers know we have a Center for Senior Health here, which is one of the clinics where I work. So more likely to see folks with this diagnosis in that clinic. So making sure that the providers are aware that this is a resource in the community, I think, is really helpful.
I love that. I know you've talked about that before when we were speaking, and how do you engage folks earlier? So your partnerships with the Alzheimer's Association is fabulous, and reaching out those that are diagnosing individuals and partnering with them. So I think those partnerships, as you mentioned, are critical. Yes. We were hoping to have someone, we have a contact in the Massachusetts, New Hampshire chapter of Alzheimer's Association. I don't see that she's here with us today, but I know that they're working really closely in Massachusetts to partner with a lot of different organizations. And so you're not, I think groups that are on the call, just know you're not at it alone. There are so many groups, as you're noting. We have another great question from, two questions. So one from Patty Polina and one from Ida Sara. And I'm going to start with Ida Sara because I know you've talked a little bit about this before, Hillary. Is how have you, or how are you reaching out to the unbefriended?
Can you say more? What does that mean exactly?
So, and I'm assuming you mean maybe those folks that don't necessarily have a loved one that they can speak with, and I don't know. So maybe if you pop that in there, I want to make sure I'm getting this right. Oh, yes, she said yes.
Okay, yeah. So this is a big issue, right? So we are really strongly encouraging folks who have an early diagnosis of dementia to complete an advance directive document. In our state document, our Honoring Choices document, there's a spot where you can initial saying, I do not have a healthcare agent, but I want whoever is making decisions on my behalf to follow this directive. So I hope that's answering part of the question, is really strongly encouraging people to complete the health directive part of the document, even if they cannot complete the durable power of attorney for healthcare piece. If they can't name anybody, that they're still writing their wishes down somewhere. Another piece that we educate folks on is there are a few organizations within our community that people can hire to be their healthcare agent. So not everybody has those resources, but I just met with a woman last week, early stages of dementia. Her mom had it. She's very clear about how she wants this process to go once she's been able to make decisions for herself. And she was financially able to hire someone to be her healthcare agent and met with them ahead of time. They got to know each other really well. And that agency is now named on her durable power of attorney for healthcare document.
That's great. Thank you. And Hillary,
so it's good to know if there's resources like that in your community.
I think that's it's a really good reminder for folks. And I just want to, I'm looking at the time, and I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing a bit about what you're doing. I'm going to spend the last 5 minutes just going over some resources. Before we do that, just thank you very much for sharing. And I know you've got some contact information here if folks want to learn a little bit more from Hillary and her team. It's up on the slide. Just one quick, I'm going to see Ronnie Gensler. I know Ronnie Gensler. I know you're on the phone. Do you have just 1 minute before I get into some resources? Do you want to share a little bit about your experience? Because I know you've been doing this work for quite a bit.
Yeah.
And just kind of pull you in a little bit. And
sure. So I was thinking about that throughout this webinar, which was really great. The one thing I wanted to tell everybody is goes back to Ellen Goodman's original video, 16-minute video. I think it was her TED Talk, or 16 or 18-minute video. It was I think her TED Talk, where she always talks about it's always too soon until it's too late. And this, to me, is especially true with people who are diagnosed with dementia. And to sort of get this out on as soon as it's comfortable for people, and to even maybe push them a little or talk to the family members about the importance of doing this kind of, having these kinds of conversations, because, you know, I mean, I've had situations where people have said, oh, my mom is in such a such, you know, has dementia, she's in assisted living, they describe the mother, and they say to me, but she's not really that bad, you know, and I'm thinking like, my God, from my experience, she's sort of in, you know, early, middle, or middle stage. It's way past the time we should have started this, you know. And I want to tell everybody that my mother had Lewy body dementia for 12 years, so I've been there, done that, and know what this is like. Fortunately, my mother, this is way before my mother died in 2007, so this was way before the Conversation Project. But she had voiced before she got sick if anything should happen to her, what she wanted, and so we were really clear, and she had advanced directives too. So for us, it wasn't such a big issue. There was no crisis at the bedside. There was no, I mean, we were sad, of course. I don't want to mitigate that, but we kind of knew what her wishes. We knew what her wishes were. But so often, in my work, I just hear people saying that. And the other thing I also hear in my work is even for people who are healthy, don't necessarily have dementia, but when I'm working with them on, you know, advanced directives and perhaps a pulsed physician or life-sustaining treatment document from their state, and they want to name their healthcare agent, and sometimes they'll name like the oldest person. So in one case, it was a couple with 2 sons in their 30s and 40s, and they said that they had named their eldest son, and I asked the question, and this son will be able to carry out your wish? And all of a sudden the wife says, oh no, he'd want to keep me alive forever, and that's not what we want. So it was like the light bulb went off, like maybe you should reconsider that, you know, reconsider who your healthcare agent is. And I think I don't hear people ever, even on these conversations, I don't hear people talking about that, to say if somebody's competent enough to name a healthcare agent, then to ask that healthcare agent, are they comfortable with that? And I always say to them, tell them it's okay if they can't do this or you're not comfortable doing it. So, you know, and just then go name somebody else. And I've seen that happen too. So
that's great, Ronnie. Thank you. I think you've brought up some really critical points. Yeah, points for reminder, especially that proxy point, and I think we can have further conversations about that. But also, I thank you for sharing your story, and I think the stories behind that obviously is kind of what we're all about as well. So thank you. I am going to have to wrap up this call, and I apologize that we know we could have a longer discussion on this. But I just want to run through just some quick housekeeping on some upcoming resources. And before the call ends, we'd love to get your feedback. We know we didn't have as much time, but we had some nice discussion here. Thank you, Ronnie, for jumping in, and I appreciate those that have jumped in on the chat. So before you end, we're going to ask for a little bit of feedback, just hopefully make our calls better and see what worked and see what didn't. So just you'll get a quick 3-question survey once you exit out of here. So real quick, some additional resources. You know that the Conversation Project's available on our website. We've had some recent compilations you may or may not have seen. So we have a blog that had a few different articles and some of the resources that are out there that have been recently written about this topic, including a New York Times article that has some really great compilation of resources within it if you're not familiar with that article. The Alzheimer's Association has some great end-of-life checklists that they've included, and organizations, you can't see it here, but if you go to their website, and we've included the link here, you can see some resources on end-of-life and conversations and other toolkits, and that's really helpful. And then some upcoming events that we have. We have our Conversation Sabbath that's coming up, so hundreds of congregations sharing, preaching, teaching about the importance of conversations within their faith communities. So we're excited about that. There's an event happening in New York City. If you're not familiar with it, check out Reimagine End of Life New York. You can just Google that. Has a citywide event coming up to talk about the importance of celebrating life and death. And then the Hospice and Palliative Care Nurse Association has a campaign that's coming up. I'm really excited, saying hashtag I've said what I want, that they are encouraging hundreds of thousands of nurses all over the U.S. to lead by example and establishing their own advanced care plans. So we're excited to share some of those upcoming events with you guys. Lastly, and thank you for sticking with me before we hang up, here are some of our upcoming calls. I would love for you to join us on our November 14th call, where we have a really special topic in our hearts is ensuring equity and reaching diverse communities. So we're going to talk about ways that we can ensure that we are not further creating inequities and making sure we are reaching the diversity within our community and ensuring everybody is getting the support for having conversations. And we have our typical other community planning calls and community planning 201 call coming up. So I would real quick running through that. Again, I just want to thank Hillary for joining us and sharing this. Thank you all that have been on the call. I know there's been some good chatter. Ronnie, thank you again. And I hope to see you guys in November. And please give us your feedback. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great. Thanks, Hillary.